When you look at the headlines today, conflicts erupting, countries realigning, it can feel like, well, a confusing, almost random series of events.
It really can. Hard to connect the dots sometimes.
But what if there's a kind of hidden architecture shaping all of this? Today, we're diving deep into the world of energy corridors.
Ah, yes. Pipelines, ports.
Exactly. Think of them as the planet's crucial arteries. Pipelines carrying fuel, bustling ports, moving goods, vital mineral reserves, and even the invisible infrastructure of our digital world.
It's the plumbing of the global economy, really.
Right. So our mission in this deep dive is to understand how these energy corridors are actively redrawing the map of Eurasia based on the compelling information we have here.
And it's a story that stretches back a bit.
Yeah, we'll be tracing these connections from the late 20th century right up to basically the present day. We're aiming to unlock some surprising moments, without overwhelming you with too much jargon.
It's fascinating, honestly, how seemingly isolated events like a pipeline proposal decades ago or a regional conflict more recently are actually, well, deeply interwoven when you look at them through this energy corridor lens.
It reveals a pattern, almost.
It does. A powerful underlying logic to many of the geopolitical shifts we've been seeing.
Okay, let's kick this off by going back. Back to the late 1980s, early 1990s.
A pivotal time.
Our sources highlight the discovery of this massive natural gas field, the South Pars North Dome Field, shared between Qatar and Iran.
Huge. The largest on Earth, I believe.
We're talking about 51 trillion cubic meters of gas. I mean, that's just a staggering amount.
Absolutely staggering.
And the division, it wasn't equal. Qatar got about 2/3, Iran only 1/3.
Yeah.
Why was this initial discovery such a pivotal moment?
Well, if you look at the bigger picture, the sheer scale of South Pars North Dome, it instantly put Qatar and Iran on the map as potential energy superpowers.
Right. Especially looking towards Europe.
Exactly. Europe was, and still is to some extent, heavily reliant on Russian gas. This discovery immediately raised the stakes in the region. It sort of set in motion the strategic competition to control how this immense resource would flow.
Okay, so that's one huge piece on the board. Then, on the other side of Asia, the U.S. gets involved in the TEPI pipeline project.
TEPI, yeah. Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India.
And the goal here seems pretty clear. Create an energy route that bypasses both Russia and Iran completely.
A classic geopolitical move.
The material mentions Unocal, a big American oil company back then, lobbying hard for TPI in the 90s. They even got support from people in the Clinton administration.
Robin Orfel, for instance.
What made TPI so strategically important for the U.S. at that time?
Well, this raises a really important point about, strategic influence. For the U.S., TPI wasn't just about getting access to Turkmen gas.
No. What else?
Fundamentally, it was about establishing an energy pathway that circumvented their main geopolitical rivals in the region, Russia and Iran.
Ah, okay. So control the route.
Precisely. By backing TPI, the U.S. aimed to sort of lessen Russia's grip on Central Asian gas exports and, critically, stop Iran from becoming a major transit hub itself. It was a calculated move to shape the Eurasian energy map in their favor.
But Afghanistan, under Burhanuddin Rabbani.
Yeah.
It was incredibly unstable then, hardly ideal for building a huge pipeline.
Not at all. Constant fighting.
So the sources suggest something pretty surprising here, that the U.S. and Pakistan's intelligence agency, the ISI, they actually supported the Taliban to impose order, specifically to get TPI built.
It's revealing, isn't it? It shows the lengths to which energy ambitions could drive policy.
It seems so counterintuitive now.
Well, the U.S. was seemingly prepared to engage, at least indirectly, with a radical group like the Taliban if it meant getting a stable route for their energy goals.
So Nokel actually talked to them.
They did. Unocal entered negotiations after the Taliban took Kabul in '96, and there were unofficial contacts, apparently, with senior American diplomats, too.
Wow. And Halliburton was involved, too, under Dick Cheney.
Yes, Halliburton saw the potential in Turkmenistan's gas, but recognized Afghanistan needed to be, quote, pacified. It really underscores how energy interests can sometimes, well, overshadow other pretty significant geopolitical factors.
But by 1998, it all fell apart, didn't it?
It did.
The Taliban's actions, especially, harboring Osama bin Laden, it just made any U.S. engagement politically impossible. Toxic, really.
Absolutely. The political cost became too high, so TPI collapsed, at least for then.
Yet the material states the U.S. was already locked into Afghanistan's fate because of these earlier energy ambitions. That's quite a sobering thought.
That's a crucial point to grasp, I think. Even though TPI didn't happen right away, that underlying strategic drive to control or influence energy flows in this really critical region had already pulled the U.S. deep into Afghanistan's complex politics.
An entanglement.
A serious entanglement, fueled by pipeline geopolitics, which would obviously have profound, long-lasting consequences down the road.
Okay, let's fast forward then to the period after 9/11. The whole geopolitical landscape just shifts dramatically.
Completely changes.
The U.S. goes from, well, trying to work with the Taliban, however uneasily,
Right.
to a full-blown military intervention.
Right.
The public reason was clear. Dismantle terrorist networks, al-Qaeda.
That was the primary driver, publicly stated.
But the sources hint there might have been other underlying motivations, too. Access to those potential gas transit routes we just talked about, and maybe newly discovered mineral wealth.
Well, if you consider the bigger picture, the 9/11 attacks provided a new justification, a very powerful one, for a more direct, more assertive U.S. presence in Afghanistan.
Right, it opened a door.
Exactly. And while countering terrorism was absolutely paramount, the potential for Afghanistan to become this key corridor for energy transit, plus this emerging awareness of its mineral wealth, that added another significant layer to the strategic thinking.
And it turns out Afghanistan was potentially sitting on a lot of mineral wealth, like an estimated $1 trillion worth.
That was the figure being floated, yes. Lithium, copper, cobalt, rare earth elements.
Things crucial for the modern economy.
Absolutely. One Pentagon memo even called Afghanistan the potential Saudi Arabia of lithium. Suddenly, it wasn't just a security problem.
It was a potential treasure trove.
Yeah.
Especially for the clean energy revolution that was just starting to gear up.
And the timing, as you say, is striking. Just as the world starts focusing on these specific minerals for electric cars, batteries, renewables, boom, these huge deposits are identified in a country where the U.S. now has a major military footprint.
Which must have attracted attention.
Oh, definitely. It sparked interest from both American and Chinese mining companies, actually, which added yet another layer of complexity to the whole situation.
Despite overthrowing the Taliban, bringing back the TPI plan, finding all this mineral wealth, the sources say persistent instability, the Taliban coming back, corruption, it all blocked any real progress.
That's right. Agreements were signed, photos taken.
Ceremonial renewals.
Exactly. But very little actually happened on the ground. It's like this incredible potential just remained perpetually out of reach.
It really raises a fundamental question, doesn't it? About whether military intervention can actually achieve these kinds of long-term economic or strategic goals.
It does. The U.S. showed it could topple regimes, sure. But building the kind of stable conditions needed for these massive energy and mining projects, that proved much, much harder.
The instability just kept undermining everything.
It was a major, major impediment to those underlying ambitions.
Okay, so let's shift the focus now. Middle East. Qatar's 2009 proposal for another gas pipeline.
Right, this one aiming for Europe.
The idea was to go via Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Syria, and Turkey. And the clear goal, again, was challenging Russia's dominance in the European energy market.
Undercutting Gazprom, basically.
But Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, backed by Iran and Russia, said no. He rejected it.
A very significant rejection.
And instead, in 2010, he signed up for a different project, the Islamic gas pipeline, with Iran and Iraq. That would take Iranian gas to the Mediterranean.
Aligning Syria firmly with the Iran-Russia bloc on energy.
This feels like a really crucial moment.
It absolutely was. If you analyze the implications, Assad's no to the Qatari pipeline and his yes to the Iranian one, it had huge consequences for the whole Eurasian energy map.
How was so?
Well, it effectively blocked a major potential route for non-Russian gas, specifically Qatari gas, to reach Europe easily. It reinforced Russia's existing position and really set the stage for a big clash of strategic interests. Assad's decision wasn't just local, it fundamentally affected European energy supply dynamics.
And then Turkey gets involved, promoting its own project.
Yes, the EU-backed Nabucco pipeline.
Which aimed to bring gas from the Caspian and the Middle East to Europe, specifically bypassing both Russia and Iran.
Another attempt at diversification.
Now, if Qatar's gas had somehow linked up with Nabucco,
that could have seriously challenged Russia's energy leverage over Europe.
So Syria's decision really wasn't just regional. It had massive Eurasian implications.
Exactly. It shows how these seemingly localized political choices can ripple outwards and affect the global energy map profoundly. Syria basically became a critical choke point in the fight for Europe's gas supply, directly impacting the strategic balance.
Which sets the stage for what happened next in Syria, starting in 2011. The Arab Spring erupts there.
A tragic turn of events.
And the source material frames this, at least partly, as an energy proxy war. You had Western powers, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Saudi, all backing rebel groups fighting Assad. Suddenly, this devastating civil war seems to have this significant underlying energy dimension.
Well, it prompts you to consider how these geopolitical conflicts can be fueled, or at least intensified, by these underlying economic and strategic goals.
Right. For Qatar, Turkey, the West, getting Assad out was arguably key to their energy plans for the region.
You could certainly argue that. His removal could have opened up that pipeline route. Conversely, for Russia and Iran, keeping Assad in power was vital.
To protect their own energy interests and influence.
Exactly. So the terrible humanitarian crisis got tangled up in this larger struggle over who controls the pipeline routes.
And then, amidst all this, in 2013, the Nabucco pipeline project collapses anyway.
Yeah, it fizzled out. Lack of secure gas sources was the main reason cited.
Which was a huge setback for Europe's efforts to diversify away from Russia.
A major blow. It effectively cleared the path for Russia's Nord Stream projects to move forward without that major competitor.
And allowed Russia to really consolidate its position as Europe's main gas supplier.
Increasing Europe's dependence, yeah, and setting the scene, really, for the next energy crisis.
Which brings us inevitably to Ukraine. Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, supporting separatists in the east. A major geopolitical crisis.
Changed the security landscape in Europe overnight.
And Ukraine, which had been this vital transit country for Russian gas heading to Europe, suddenly becomes unreliable, right? From both sides' perspectives.
Hugely unreliable. Transit fees, political disputes. It was a constant point of tension.
Yet, despite all that, despite the sanctions over Crimea, Germany pushes ahead, doubling down on its energy ties with Russia through Nord Stream 2.
Doubling the capacity under the Baltic Sea, yeah. Direct link, bypassing Ukraine entirely.
It seems incredibly risky looking back, especially with warnings coming from the U.S., from Eastern European countries.
There were many warnings. Poland, the Baltic states, they were very vocal about Russia potentially weaponizing gas supplies.
But Germany prioritized economics, cheap gas.
It seems so. Perceived economic pragmatism, maybe. They believed they were securing a cheap, reliable energy source, but it was a strategic gamble that ultimately left Europe very exposed.
And by 2021, Europe was relying on Russia for nearly 40% of its gas. Huge leverage for Moscow.
Immense leverage.
Then, February 2022, Russia launches its full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
The gamble fails.
Germany finally freezes Nord Stream 2. Too late, perhaps.
Certification was halted, yes.
And then, September 2022, those mysterious explosions. Sabotage on both Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines.
A truly dramatic event. Rendered them unusable.
Effectively cutting Europe off from that cheap Russian gas supply route. Now, who's responsible? Still murky. Lots of theories.
Very murky. Investigations are ongoing, but definitive proof is hard to come by.
But the effect is undeniable, isn't it?
Absolutely undeniable. It removed Russia's easiest, most direct way to pressure Europe using gas exports. That leverage was just gone overnight.
And who steps into that huge energy gap?
Well, the U.S., primarily, with liquefied natural gas, LNG.
Right. America starts rapidly increasing LNG exports to Europe.
They ramped up production and shipments significantly.
And new LNG import terminals started popping up all over Europe, Germany, Poland, the Netherlands.
They had to build the infrastructure quickly to receive it.
And U.S. LNG prices surged, didn't they? Big profits for American shale gas companies.
A boom time for U.S. LNG exporters, certainly, while Europe faced soaring energy costs.
It's almost like the Nord Stream crisis, whoever caused it, unexpectedly handed America a dominant energy role in Europe.
It certainly triggered a dramatic shift. The long reliance on Russian pipeline gas was shattered, and the U.S. emerged as a critical alternative supplier, which of course increased its economic and strategic influence over European allies.
But the U.S. couldn't fill the entire gap alone, right? Europe needed more.
No, the gap was too big, which leads us to the critical role of Qatar.
Another major LNG player, one of the world's biggest exporters, along with the U.S.
Exactly. With massive production from its North Field expansions and huge expertise in shipping LNG.
So Europe turned to Qatar as well. Long-term supply contracts signed with Germany, France, Italy.
Yes. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz even made a personal trip to Qatar specifically to secure those energy deals. It was seen as that vital.
So Qatari LNG becomes another strategic pillar for Europe's new energy setup, alongside the U.S. supplies.
That's right. It's a diversification strategy. Securing LNG from both the U.S. and Qatar significantly weakens Moscow's old gas weapon.
And strengthens alliances with Western-aligned nations.
Precisely. By 2023, you had over 40% of Europe's imported LNG coming from the U.S. and Qatar combined. It's a whole new energy architecture.
And looking at the strategic benefits for the U.S., it seems pretty clear. They helped disconnect Europe from Russian gas dependency.
Check.
They reasserted a degree of economic leadership.
Check.
Their shale gas exporters made record profits.
Check.
What about Qatar?
Qatar definitely boosted its global diplomatic standing. It's skillfully balancing relationships between the West and major buyers in Asia, like China.
Meanwhile, Russia's gas leverage over Europe is neutralized.
Effectively gone, yes.
And interestingly, the sources suggest this makes China more strategically vulnerable because of its own dependence on Middle Eastern energy, which now flows through areas of Western influence.
That's a fascinating point. It highlights how interconnected everything is. Actions in Europe have ripple effects all the way to East Asia. It creates new vulnerabilities potentially for Beijing.
Okay, then comes another major development.
What?
September 2023, G20 summit in Delhi. The announcement of IMEC.
The India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor.
Yeah.
Yes, a very ambitious project.
Backed by the U.S., India, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, the EU, Israel. A big coalition.
A significant grouping of nations.
And it outlines this network of shipping and rail links connecting India to Europe via the Middle East. But critically, look who it bypasses.
Iran and Turkey. Both noticeable omissions.
Which seems like a deliberate strategic choice.
Oh, absolutely. If you analyze the strategic thinking, IMEC looks like a major attempt to create an alternative trade route between Asia and Europe, one that doesn't rely on routes heavily influenced by China or Russia.
A counter to China's Belt and Road Initiative?
It certainly looks like a direct response, or at least a major alternative. It gives the U.S. and its partners considerable potential strategic advantage.
Can you break down the structure? It's two corridors.
That's right. There's an eastern corridor, ships from India to the UAE, then rail across the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Israel, ending up at the port of Haifa.
Okay.
Then a northern corridor, ships from Haifa across the Mediterranean to Greece or Italy, and then rail links onwards into France and Germany.
It's strategically quite clever in how it weaves through those specific countries, avoiding Iran and Turkey.
Very clever. It gives Europe another potential trade link to Asia, reduces reliance on other routes, and it really positions India, again, as a central pivot point in Eurasian trade.
Like the old spice routes or Silk Road almost?
Echoes of that, yes. Reviving India's historical role.
And unsurprisingly, Turkish President Erdogan reacted quite sharply, didn't he? Warning about bypassing Turkey.
He did. Understandably, Ankara wasn't pleased about being excluded from such a major potential trade route.
It highlights Turkey's somewhat tricky position now, doesn't it? Having tilted more towards Russia and China recently, maybe finding itself a bit isolated from these new Western-led infrastructure plans?
That seems to be the case. IMEC, combined with that new LNG energy architecture in Europe we discussed. Well, from Washington's viewpoint, it certainly looks like building a Western-dominated alternative to the kind of Eurasian integration China and Russia have been pushing.
Okay, one last piece of this puzzle.
Yeah.
China's response. They haven't been idle.
No, definitely not. They've been developing their own corridor, the China-Myanmar Energy Corridor.
Right. Since about 2013, building oil and gas pipelines from the port of Kakfu on Myanmar's coast running up to Kunming in China's Yunnan province.
And the key strategic goal here for Beijing?
Bypassing the Malacca Strait, that vulnerable choke point where something like 80% of China's oil imports currently have to pass through.
Exactly. It's about energy security, reducing reliance on that one easily disruptible sea lane. The Myanmar corridor offers a shorter, theoretically more secure land route.
Theoretically, because the U.S. and its allies haven't exactly welcomed this, have they?
No. The sources mention sanctions against Myanmar's regime, but also hint at possible covert support for ethnic insurgent groups inside Myanmar.
Like the Arakan Army, the Chin Independence Army. Groups active in the regions those pipelines pass through.
The suggestion is that the aim might be to destabilize those areas, make the corridor unreliable, dangerous, costly for China to maintain.
So Myanmar becomes another sort of silent battleground in this U.S.-China economic contest.
It appears that way. It underscores just how competitive these global energy corridor projects are. The U.S. seems to be actively working to undermine China's strategic infrastructure, viewing it as a challenge. The instability in Myanmar becomes another front in this less visible but very real struggle for control.
So when we step back, try to pull all these threads together, the big picture, the fundamental insight seems to be, well, that the conflicts, the realignments of the 21st century, they're deeply rooted in who controls energy and connectivity.
I think that's right. Pipelines, ports, shipping lanes, now even digital cables and mineral supply chains. They're not just infrastructure. They're powerful instruments of geopolitical influence.
Yeah. If we synthesize all this, the examples we've walked through from those early TPI dreams, the Syrian pipeline war, the Nord Stream saga, the rise of IMEs, the fight over the Myanmar corridor.
They aren't isolated incidents. They're all connected pieces in a much larger, ongoing global contest.
A contest for what, ultimately?
For dominance, really. Over Eurasia's vital energy flows, its mineral wealth, its crucial trade routes. It's a multifaceted struggle.
And the long-term implications feel immense. The countries or blocs that manage to control or at least significantly influence these critical corridors, they'll likely hold huge sway over the global economy and the geopolitical order for decades to come.
It really sets the stage for the coming century, which leads to a final thought, perhaps, for you, the listener.
Yeah.
As you see news about global infrastructure projects, a new port here, a railway line there, a pipeline announced, I'd encourage you to think beyond the surface. Consider the less obvious prizes that might be at stake.
The hidden motivations.
Exactly. How might seemingly straightforward economic or building projects be driven by deeper geopolitical rivalries? How will these ongoing, often quite silent, battles over energy and connectivity continue to shape the world we live in? Maybe ask yourself. When you see that new project in the headlines, what unseen strategic advantages might really be the driving force behind it?